Okay, we are now continuing with part two, and we just talked about activation energy. And this is a necessary addition to our energy diagram that shows the hill or the hump that we have to get over to activate a reaction. And in the energy diagram, this EA we can define as the difference in energy between the reactants and the highest point in the energy diagram. So that's the top of the hill. And so this is measured along the y-axis. Activation energies exist for both exothermic and endothermic reactions, but it is always measured from the reactants to the top of the hill. And so we can see clearly that for an exothermic reaction where the reactants have higher energy, all other things fairly equal, it will have a smaller activation energy because the reactants are already higher. Now, for an endothermic reaction with the same top of the hill, the activation energy will be larger. The example I gave last time was a spark that would ignite methane or start a fire. That would be providing the energy to get over the hill. That is the amount of energy that must be attained by reactants for a chemical reaction to occur. Okay, so what does this have to do with rate? Well, the rate of a chemical reaction is actually largely determined by the amount of energy needed to get the reaction started. So it's largely determined by the activation energy. Another note there, yeah, think of this as the startup costs, what it takes to get started. And if you can come up with those funds quicker, the reaction will proceed at a faster rate. So here's a quote from your book. The activation energy is related to the rate of a reaction, whereas the change in enthalpy, delta H, is related to the difference in potential energy between the reactants and the products. And there is not necessarily a relationship between delta H and activation energy. They're not really related. Okay, so activation energy has to do with the rate of a reaction. Let's pause and take a question. What is activation energy? Read these for yourself and answer. Okay, and now that you're back, activation energy is the symbol EA, yes. It's the top of the hill in an energy diagram. Yes, it's the difference in energy between reactants and the highest point. Yes, it's the amount of energy that must be attained by reactants for a chemical reaction to occur. Yes, so all of the above, right? It's really the difference between the energy and the top of the hill, but the top of the hill is sometimes called the point of the activation energy. All right, so how does it relate to rate? I'm going to ask you a question. Which energy diagram shows the faster reaction? Okay, use your intuition on what you have learned so far. Notice delta H is identical between these two reactions. Reactants and products are at the same energy. The differences are the same, right? The only difference overall is in the height of the hill, so the activation energy. So which energy diagram do you think shows the faster reaction? And it would be the one on the right, reaction B. Because it has a smaller activation energy, it's a smaller hill, it will be easier to get over, and reactants will turn into products faster. So here's the core concept right here. A smaller activation energy means a faster reaction, and a larger activation energy means a slower reaction. The bigger the hill, the longer it takes to get over, the less likely a reaction is to get over, and it will be slower. The smaller the activation energy, the smaller the hill, the more likely reactants will be able to get over it faster, and the reaction will be faster. And notice that these have identical delta H's, so this is not related to the heat of reaction, delta H. Another question. Select the true statement. So go ahead and read these for yourself. Pause it and answer. Okay, so a couple things to see. It's about the rate of reactions, and we know that reaction rate is not dependent on delta H, so it's not anything there. And then it's just finding the correct combination here, and it says fast reactions have high. No, that's not right. Slow reactions have low. No, that's not right. Fast reactions have small activation energies, like we see here. Faster, slower. Okay, another question for you. Select the correct statement regarding the reactions represented by the energy diagrams here. So read the responses carefully. They're not all about rate necessarily. It's just about the reactions in general. So pause and answer for yourself. Okay, so exothermic means that the products are lower in energy than the reactants. An exothermic diagram would look like this. And none of these look like this, or neither, so they're not exothermic. They are endothermic. They are identical in terms of heat of enthalpy, but they have different activation energies, so they will have different rates. And if we're looking for the slower one, that would be the one that has the higher hill, the higher activation energy, which is reaction A. Okay, we just have one more thing to cover, and I think we'll just go ahead and continue with this video and try to get it done without a part 3 today. So we talked about activation energy and energy and orientation, right? The first two things, energy and orientation, can affect rates. Well, what else about a reaction or a reaction system do you think can affect the rate? Okay, so the couple of things that I have in mind here. One of them directly influences the energy that reactants have, right? And so that would increase the energy of a collision. The other one will increase the likelihood of a collision. Okay, so these two things are temperature and concentration. So think about why temperature can affect the rate. And we go back to the model of N2 and O2 colliding. These are gas molecules. So if we increase the temperature, remember that temperature is the average kinetic energy of the particles. Then when they collide, they will have more energy. Also, kinetic energy is the energy of motion. So they will be moving faster. So there will be more collisions with more energy, which will allow reactants to get over that barrier easier and increase the rate. So an increase in the temperature leads to an increase in the rate. The second thing is concentration. So if there are, a concentration is how many reactants are there, right? How much is present. And if you have more reactants, there would be more encounters between the reactants, more collisions. And even if the temperature is not increased, the fact that there are more collisions means that there's a distribution of energies, and some of them will get over the barrier. And so increasing concentration leads to increasing the rate. And so in terms of a reaction that is already occurring, you can think about the reactants being used up, right, and turning into products. So they're going to disappear. They're turning into something else. I mean, the atoms themselves don't disappear, but the reactants are no longer there. And so we actually see generally reaction rates slow down as the reaction occurs because the number of reactants left continues to go down. So fewer and fewer collisions until at some point the reaction basically stops going when there's no reactants left. Okay, so temperature and concentration, increase either of those, you also increase the rate. And so those both have to do with the energy of the collision and the number of collisions. And remember, the other factor was orientation. And another thing that can affect the rate is the presence of a catalyst. Now, catalysts can work by different mechanisms, but one way to think about this is to help orient the molecules with each other, orient the reactants into the proper orientation to proceed to products. So what a catalyst will do to the energy diagram is lower the activation energy. So it doesn't actually change delta H, probably doesn't change the temperature, concentration, energy of collision. It usually will have something to do with the orientation of the collision. And so it's only going to affect the activation energy. So we see here without a catalyst in the pink and with the catalyst in the purple, and it lowers the activation energy, which means it increases the rate because a lower activation energy increases the rate. It does not affect delta H of the reaction. And importantly, catalysts are not actually part of the reaction because they're not consumed by the reaction. They are like an extra thing that can be around the reaction. It provides a lower energy alternative from reactants to products, a different reaction pathway. If the activation energy is like a hill or a mountain, the catalyst provides a tunnel through the mountain. Okay, so question time. Which of these changes will increase the rate of a reaction? Pause and answer for yourself. So the first question is about concentration, the second one is about temperature, and the third one is about a catalyst. And all of these will effectively change a reaction rate, but this question is asking us specifically which will increase, right? And so decreasing the concentration will slow down the rate. Lowering the temperature will also slow down or decrease the rate. But adding a catalyst does, in fact, increase the rate of the reaction. Okay, one final short topic. What if we have a biochemical reaction that is too slow? So this would be a reaction that's a physiological, important reaction that occurs within the body, and it's not happening at the proper rate. It's too slow. We have three things, right? Temperature, increase temperature, increase the concentration, or add catalysts. Well, if this is something occurring inside the body, increasing the temperature is not really an option. And we often do not have control over the concentration of species inside. And so the catalyst would be the way to go. And your body naturally does this. You have thousands of millions of different enzymes, which are so enzymes are the name for biological catalysts. So I'm sure you've heard of enzymes, and they are essentially the same as a catalyst, but just with a specific biological context. And nearly every biochemical reaction is catalyzed by some type of enzyme. And that helps it occur at the proper time scale, right? At an appropriate and required rate. There are, in fact, millions of different enzymes in a cell, and they are essential for life because in their absence, biochemical reactions would be too slow. Okay, so to wrap up, we have the rate of chemical reactions, which is the change in concentrations over time, can be influenced by energy and orientation, and temperature, concentration, and the presence of catalysts all can influence this as well. So that wraps up section 2 of chapter 6. So go check out the post-lecture questions and come back soon for section 6.3. Take care.